I'm your host, Lara August. I'm the CEO of Robot Creative, and we have worked with thousands of what we call very large businesses. We write marketing plans and provide marketing leadership to companies on a part-time basis. And those consultants are called fractional CMOs or chief marketing officers. We have a team of talented directors and a growing network of CMOs that we place with clients. Each of them brings their own unique background and perspectives to the table, and I wanted to take advantage of that. So every month, I have a conversation with one of our CMOs or directors, and we cover topics and recurring themes that we see in these very large small businesses that we work with. So today, my guest is Andrew Watson. He is our Director of Branding here at Robot Creative. And today, we're going to be talking about branding and specifically, when is it time to rebrand? So Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, good to be here.
And to introduce the topic, this can be like a little bit of a tricky question. Let's just dive in with how do you know when you should rebrand? What's the tell?
Yeah, so that is a question. So I actually get asked that quite a bit. I get asked that a lot. And there's no expiration date to a brand. It's not like a gallon of milk, it's like, oh, expires this date. And it's definitely not a one size, fits all answer as well. But what I will say is that answer really should typically revolve around a business decision or a business shift. There's several different types of reasons, but I would say the most common ones are there's been a change in your offerings as a business. Your audience has changed or shifted. There might be a need for a perception change within your brand. You've acquired or there's been a merger within your company, or you've brought on an acquisition. Sometimes it's even very drastic, like there's been a mission or core value change or a leadership change within your company. And then kind of almost like a common one or catch-all sometimes, it's like you just start looking dated and it becomes kind of apparent for that. But those are probably the most common reasons.
Yeah, so all of these, Andrew and I have been doing branding. Robot's been around for 28, going on 29 years at this point, and we've worked together for 22 of those. Both of us have been doing this a really long time, and so we've seen all of those reasons. There's a lot of great reasons why you might want to rebrand, and we're going to dig deeper into some of those points that he just raised. But there's also some reasons that we hear that are not good reasons to rebrand. And so, I want to touch on that for a moment too, because sometimes we get people asking to change their brand, and it's not actually something we would recommend. So I think it's worth touching on those, Andrew.
Yeah. And so some of the reasons that, as you mentioned, are not good. A lot of times it's really kind of like personal preference we'll kind of see. And what I mean by that is kind of like Bob in sales doesn't like the red in their brand because it reminds him of his first car from 1985 that used to break down, and so he associates that red with this clunker of
a rival college. Texas, we're big on our sports teams here and our colleges and our school colors, and we hear all the time that people do or don't want something because of a university tie-in.
Right, just stuff like that. So basically, it's in a nutshell, it's personal preferences. So you have to really kind of disassociate that with, you're not the target audience, Bob, in sales.
We have a whole episode on you are not the target audience, just for what it's worth.
Yeah, so that's a pretty common one. I'll kind of hear. Sometimes there's a new marketing director or somebody that comes into the organization, just got hired. They really wants to make their mark, and or a designer or something. It's like, hey, I'm gonna really put a stamp on my hiring, and so it just becomes this big initiative where it maybe really doesn't need to be. So that's another one I think we've kind of come across.
We see that with almost every new new hire in a small business. It's just very common that and I can understand why. Like a new marketing director comes in, and if they see, maybe they're sensing that there are things that aren't quite right with the brand, or, depending on how sophisticated the marketing director is, it might be their personal preference, or they may actually sense or know that something is not right with the brand. And so they want to enhance it or evolve it. Sometimes we see new designers come in, and a lot of small businesses, they don't really have a marketing director or a CMO. So a lot of times it's kind of like lower experience leveled employees that come in and they want to be creative. I mean, like we went to school, for design, like Andrew and I, right? So like you don't go into school to just learn how to be a production person. Like you usually go into school and you study creativity and you study design and you want to do something awesome. So it's rare that a designer is going to be real excited about just continuing with what's there. It's much more normal for them to come in with a burst of energy. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes it enhances the brand. It can lead to new campaigns. It can evolve things. Sometimes though, it's just not the right time or not the right move. So I think filtering that is really important.
Yeah, showing some restraint. But yeah, it's a common situation. And I think probably maybe like a third thing that we might see is that maybe sometimes external vendors like agencies or sign companies or something like that might have, some reasons that it's like, hey, because it relates to kind of what they're going to be doing as a part of the brand. And so it kind of starts filtering that way to kind of either make their life easier or what have you. But that's sometimes happens.
We see this if we're approached by a client that wants to get a website redesign, for example, and it's clear that they don't have strong branding. We have to develop that in the context of building the website. And luckily for people coming to us, like we have a very strong branding practice. So we're not just going to design a website without considering their brand. We actually talk to them about branding. We go through a process to help make sure that what we're creating for the website is also part of a strong branding package that's going to, meet all of their requirements, some of which we're going to discuss in a little bit. But what we do see sometimes is that there will be a client that goes to, and you usually see it in a practice that is not a branding practice, right? Like some web firms are fantastic web developers or web designers even, but they may not do branding per se. And but they'll have to develop a brand. They'll have to create something to complete their website project if there isn't much to work with. And so you kind of get like a brand by default, and so in small businesses, this happens all the time because you have to work with a variety of different vendors. You usually don't have a 5-person in-house team, and so I think that's always something to watch out for is just like accidental branding, right? Like branding that you didn't really intentionally choose. It wasn't necessarily strategic. It's more of like a graphic activity or sometimes a messaging activity and not really strategic, I guess is the best word.
Yeah, it gets kludged together by a lot of different, vendors or what have you. And that becomes like your brand and that becomes very apparent.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, I didn't bake this into our preparation questions, Andrew, but just going off script a little bit, I think that we need to address what is a brand? We have a whole different episode where we dive deep into what branding is, but I think it's worth mentioning, a little bit of a conversation about, it's more than a logo. So can you kind of talk to us about the different facets of what makes up a brand?
Right, sure, absolutely. And that is a common misconception sometimes where a brand, it's not just like the visual asset. It's not just your logo. It's not your colors and fonts and pictures and everything like that. That is certainly part of the umbrella of your brand. But your brand really is how people perceive your company, and so it's basically, it's everything. So it's kind of like from how you answer the phone to, obviously like your website and all the touch points that people will interact with your brand, but it's really that overarching feeling that you get from a company or an organization. And so, so it is everything. It's all encompassing, and that's really your brand. It's kind of like what people perceive from your company.
Yes, the logo is a piece of that, but if you have a storefront, there's a lot of color, a lot of visual, a lot of things that go into it. It might be the smell, right, of a space or a location. It could be the sound, the vibe that you get when you walk in. So when we're talking about branding, it goes way beyond the logo. Obviously, like the core for most businesses begins with a logo and some core messaging and some core identity, visual assets and things like that. But really, it's something that's even more comprehensive than that. So I do think it's important to just kind of look at that as, in the context of this discussion. We're not talking about logos. We're not just talking about visual assets. We're talking about brand with a capital B, I guess.
Yeah. Brand proper.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. So one of the things that you mentioned that could be a change is audience. And so I think it's important that we start by talking about audience and how important audience alignment is when you're developing a brand or when you're considering redeveloping a brand or redesigning a brand. So let's start there.
Yeah, the audience, super important, obviously. And so, as we kind of talked about earlier, we're talking about, some of the pitfalls or why you wouldn't want to do because it's like personal preference. And so in those situations, you're not really including the audience becomes an audience of one, or whatever. And you're not the audience. And so that's obviously very important. And so honestly, the more info you can get, the better. Any kind of insight info to where some obvious ones are just kind of like, talking to some of the stakeholders within an organization to kind of get their ideas on like, well, who is your target audience, type things. And sometimes you have to really dig deep, or actually a lot of times you have to really dig deep because sometimes it's very surface level towards like, well, our audience are people that buy XYZ. Where it's like you really need to understand what are their decision drivers, what are their motivations, how do they engage with not only your brand, but brands that are similar to your brands. And so really understanding very deeply that audience and really what resonates with them.
I think that understanding, like to your point, if we have a business owner or a leader or somebody who is trying to, change the brand into something that matters to them, or sometimes we'll have like a squeaky wheel is what I would call it. That might be somebody in the company. It could be a customer that's just ornery, or a friend or a spouse or a child. Like sometimes we have owners like whose children enter the picture and they have a really strong feeling about the direction something should take. And they may be putting their finger on something. So I don't want to discount that just for the sake of it. But I do think that anytime a brand comes into question, is it working or isn't it working? We have to start by saying, who is the audience? Like what matters to them? And, is it still aligned with the audience? So, we do use lots of different tools. So personas and interviews and surveys and, really large companies will do whole brand studies if they're doing it right. Not like maybe Cracker Barrel or something, but many companies, before they embark on a rebrand, if they have lots of resources, they're going to go do focus groups and they're going to do surveys and they're going to try to understand what these brands mean to their audience before they would ever consider changing it. And with small businesses, a lot of times the budget just isn't there for that. And so we're using more anecdotal information. But again, like one person is probably not the right sample size to understand if it's time to rebrand or not. Like a whole leadership team or, the key people in a company, that starts to get better. But when we go out to like the sales team speaking with the audience, like that's when it really starts to become more concrete information that is actionable in my mind. Is like, are we talking to customers or are we talking to prospective customers, and is the brand communicating what we want it to communicate, being perceived the right way? And if it isn't, then it's definitely time to work on something.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just the more information you can get. But what's very interesting also is like, you get like salespeople giving information back, but then you'll have like leadership or CEO or something having maybe some different opinions. And so really kind of needing everybody to be aligned in that, because it's like you might think that it's, your customers might be, having this kind of perception, but then it might not actually be that way.
Yeah,
So you don't want to trust
definitely.
your gut on this.
No, this is not a gut reaction type of thing. This is
Yeah.
something that should be considered and tested and like thought through strategically. So it can't be like the designer wanting to put their mark on something just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think you may have mentioned like sometimes an audience can just be way too broad, and I think we've seen that before. I don't know if you have any examples of like times where somebody comes in and it's like, well, everyone might want to buy this, and then that isn't really effective in terms of messaging and communicating something.
Yeah, no, and that's a common kind of I guess pitfall as well, to where it's like, our audience is everybody that buys this product or service that we offer. And I mean, I'll just kind of give like an example of like everybody can probably relate to, like a large kind of company like Nike or something like that. It's like, yes, their audience are people that buy athletic wear and shoes and everything like that, but they're so good at like doing these very targeted, like if you're like a runner, like there's Nike will have like very specific brand messaging, and their branding that it's kind of like it's almost like one of these is like, if you know, you know. And so if you're a runner, there is language, there is imagery, there are things that it's like, okay, yeah, that's me. And so it's like, you get me, rather than just like their messages and like, we like athletes and, all that type of stuff. They have some of that overarching thing, but they're very good at pinpointing their audience.
That makes sense. So there's kind of like mini brands or campaigns
Yeah,
within
like
the
a micro
overarching
brand. Yeah.
brand, right? So it's like they're still all under the umbrella of Nike. Some companies actually break things out into different divisions, but
Yeah.
where we have like a lot of consumer products, they will stay under the main parent brand, and they'll just create campaigns or specific messaging that it all has to still fit under that umbrella
Under that
brand.
brand. Yeah.
Yeah. But it can get very specific in terms of the messaging and the imagery and things like that that's used to reach those niche audiences. So that's very important. And then, audiences. So we're talking about rebranding. Audiences can change over time. We work with a lot of older businesses, and those decision makers and influencers that they're trying to reach can change. And when there are different generations in play, they may have very different channels and ways that they will engage with a brand. And so that can be a really good reason. Like if we're seeing a major audience shift, you're going to want to address it and make sure that the brand is still on point.
Yeah, absolutely. Because your audience that was 20 years ago, even though it's the same type of thing you're selling, that audience now would be different.
Absolutely.
And what their needs are.
Yeah. And then expansion. So we've seen businesses that are trying to reach new audiences. So you may have a very well-established brand. It may be resonating really well with the people that you're already working with. So a new generation is one type of expansion or change where you may need to adjust the brand. But it might also be a different geography. So buyer profiles can be really different, from one geography to the next.
No, absolutely. That's a huge one because depending on where you are, to where if you're used to having your brand kind of look a certain way or talk a certain way, that doesn't translate to all geographies. Subtle things that you might not even think about. Like, I know we've come across a lot of times where we'll have like photography or something, and there's a tree in the background of a thing, and it's just like, you'll get some arborist to come. It's like, that's not, from around, it becomes very apparent to where it's like, that's a Doug fir tree. Those things don't grow in Texas, or what have you.
Yeah, we're in Texas. If you see the really tall, straight trees, lots of fir
Yeah.
trees, like an obvious like northern forest, we're like,
Yeah.
this is not Texas.
Right. Yeah. And so it's everything from that to like, language. Again, we're in Texas. Y'all happens here pretty common, and
It
that's
does.
not
And
a
I'm from Chicago, so I say you guys, even if I'm talking to a room full of ladies. It's just what comes out, right?
it's
And I'm
it
I'm aware of that, but in your corporate messaging, it may or may not be appropriate to use different vernacular, to use different imagery, to use, things like that. It's important to adjust knowing who you're speaking with.
and it will just from a brand standpoint, it just becomes unauthentic to where it's almost kind of like, oh, you just copy and pasted a email to everybody, mass and without thinking about it. And so it comes out that way to where the trust starts to kind of like dwindle and fracture.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even something as simple as like seasonality, like we don't have much of that here in Texas. So I'll be
Mhm.
wearing things like this even in like December. And that's fine. And if we were doing client advertising and, showcasing people for seasonal sales or, any type of seasonal messaging, like the range of what people might wear in those photos or what you might see in the background, Christmas looks different here and it looks different in every part of the country, and different holidays, different festivals. There's a lot that you can do to highlight geography. And so, is that going to be reflected in your logo? Like maybe not. Like if you have an Alamo logo, which a lot of people here in in San Antonio or even in Texas do, there's a lot of Alamo shaped logos. And if you're expanding beyond Texas, that may or may not fly, depending if you're selling Alamo cookies, maybe, or Alamo beer, that is the thing. And it's totally appropriate for that. But otherwise, thinking about, the brand imagery, but also the messaging, all of that, and how that plays into your expansion goals as your audience changes, I think is really
Yeah.
important. So we're talking about expansion, and that leads into another reason to rebrand, right? It might be that your business is changing, like your products or services, like there's all kinds of different things that could change within a business. And so let's talk about how some of those might necessitate a rebrand.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, there's varying degrees of like change we're talking about here, but sometimes it is like a core business model change. And so that is something that clearly you would need to change your brand if you're going from one entity to another. One of an example we had, for those people around here, we did a rebrand of Santikos, which, for historically that's been like associated with movie theaters, basically. And so, when we worked with doing the rebrand, they had actually changed their complete business model from going from just a commercial movie theater basically to a social enterprise, which it was a very dramatic shift in how they operated. And so,
And just to pause for everybody that's not here, so people in San Antonio may or may not be familiar with it, but beyond, probably not. So Mr. Santikos was this incredible entrepreneur that built a huge chain of movie theaters and had a lot of real estate holdings. And when he passed away, he bequeathed all of these operating businesses to the San Antonio Area Foundation. So now, because that's one of the few types of entities that can receive operating businesses. And he didn't want to just have his businesses liquidated or sold to a competitor. He wanted them to continue generating revenue in perpetuity that could support our county and all the surrounding counties, which is such an incredible gift. It was one of the largest charitable gifts in the entire country the year that it happened. And so we came in to help change it from like this commercial enterprise to more of a social enterprise. So we needed to communicate this greater good. That was part of it.
Yeah, and so there was, and as you get into these types of rebrands, there's some obvious ones, but when we're doing this rebrand, to where there was just a lot of things we're noticing, like even just from the logo itself, to where you look at movie theater logos, and apparently they don't rebrand a lot because almost all of them are red. For some reason, I suspect that's from like red curtains of a theater or something. I'm not sure, but there's so many that are red. And this in particular for Santikos, they had like a reel-to-reel film kind of logo, which
And it had been digital for like decades.
right, it's so antiquated. And then one of their actual like differentiators was innovation, to where like they were always at the forefront of getting the newest, sound systems and digital, display projection, whatever, and seats and everything. And so it's like that does not fit. So on top of just having to be more of a social enterprise or look kind of like a nonprofit, there was that to address as well. So yeah, so once you kind of get under the hood, you gotta there's a lot of tweaks.
And they probably had some like what I would say like deferred maintenance that had kind of piled up, as the company aged and Mr. Santikos aged. They how they went so long with a film reel for a logo is a really big question, right? And additionally, they had bowling alleys and pool tables and arcades, and like they're in addition to being innovative and having all of these wider, more broad entertainment options, none of that had been updated in just their logo, and probably not in their look and feel either, because it was red, like you said, just like everybody else's. And, so probably lots of things should have happened even before we came along to keep it up to date. So those things needed to happen just to represent the business accurately. And then when you add the social enterprise aspect on top of it, it's not like we baked that into the logo as much. A lot of that came in the form of core messaging, reels before every movie starts to explain why this business is here, what it's doing for the community, and, really trying to identify those opportunities for messaging, and just, of course, a whole brand campaign to let the community know, about this incredible gift and how it is going to affect our community. So that's a really great example of, offerings changing, technology changing, the whole business model changing. Like there's just so many things wrapped up in that one. And you can find that case study on our website if you want to read more about it. Another one is mergers and acquisitions. So we've worked with a lot of companies that have experienced these types of changes where they're large, they're established and successful, and they'll go and acquire other brands or other assets or whole companies. And so let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting one because depending on the type of company that they're acquiring, it's going to, it would take, depending on what they're doing, it could be a huge shift, or it might be just kind of some tweaks here and there. But, one of the things that you have to really kind of consider when you're doing that as well is brand architecture, because, just bringing in another entity, it really changes your organizational structure. And so there's not confusion with your audience. It's like, wait a minute. So I thought you were this company, but now you do this. And so there's really kind of a structure that needs to be kind of made sense of. And that translates into branding, because it's like, okay, there's different ways to do that, to where are you still the parent company and this is kind of like a sub brand below that? Is it equal? And so there's all that needs to be kind of like detangled and made sense from just a purely structural standpoint. And then that informs how the branding and the communication goes out after that.
Yeah, I think brand architecture is such an important concept, and it's kind of like a discipline within a discipline, right? Like, so it's not about just creating a logo. It's not about creating the visual assets, like really deeply understanding brand architecture. To be good at that, you have to have a lot of business acumen, and going back to audiences, a lot of times we're trying to figure out of, these brands that we're trying to merge or combine, are they the same audience? Are they a different audience? Is the product, reaching the audience in the same way? Is one of them more luxury? Is one of them more discount? Or is it a totally different audience? Sometimes sometimes you just need to communicate really different things. And so, we've had a lot of businesses approach us because they've said, hey, we just either launched this new division or we acquired this other company, and we're trying to figure out how this stuff goes together, and we're just not sure how to make it work. And these are really fun for us. It's untangling or detangling, I think, is one of the ways that you referred to it. And I think that it's really important in those situations to stop and consider, go all the way back to like, as if you're branding for the first time and saying, for all the companies or all the products that are involved, like, who is the audience? Who is the competition? What are the pain points? Really kind of starting from the ground up and building back up to see, if there's brand equity and you want to keep it and you want to use it, like, by all means, we're not going to say like, throw the baby out with the bathwater. If there's good pieces there that are resonating with that audience, you want to get as much mileage out of it as you can and find out where things work together and overlap. But, sometimes you're just amplifying that or absorbing one brand into another, but other times you have to restructure and think about it differently.
Yeah, really. And the common, one of the common themes here we got is like, know your audience, because because there's situations where there is overlap where it makes sense to have a little bit more of what is called like a little bit of like an endorsed brand, where you're still having that parent company and it kind of echoes throughout the rest of the branding. But sometimes it makes absolutely no sense. And so at that point, you're like, okay, these are separate brands under this umbrella. And there's obvious financial situations there, because then you're managing multiple brands as well. So the very large companies, they do that all day, every day, but they've got a bunch of independent brand managers and people that can handle all that stuff. So it becomes a little bit more challenging for smaller, medium-sized, even large businesses. So.
Yeah, I would say almost as a general rule, we recommend working with the smallest number of brands that you can, just because the brand management aspect of it that Andrew's describing, like the cost of maintaining multiple brands, especially if you're taking it all the way to like, sometimes you can combine them in the same website, but if you have really separate brands, it just becomes a lot of work. And so if they need to be separate, they need to be separate. But if they can be combined, if you can work with one brand, that tends to be more manageable for a small business. And I see Christabel popping in, so that must mean we have a question. Do you have something for us?
Yes, we do. And it's not really related to acquisition, but they are asking if there is a rule of thumb in regards to the life of a brand for an annual event. I'm thinking probably like something like, Ciclovia or Rock and Roll Marathon, right? Like, at what point is there a rule of thumb to rebrand at that point?
That's a really good question. Event branding.
Event branding, that's pretty specific. A lot of times what I'll see with event branding is, because it's an event, and so you want people to come to it, and so you have to generate excitement or newness, basically. And so I would kind of almost by default think that you should have, it's almost kind of like there could be like an overarching brand that stays consistent, but the theme or campaign associated with it becomes new and exciting, because it's like, hey, we did that last year. It's like, why would we want to do that again? It's like, so you need almost a reason for people to be engaged. And so from a kind of a, just off the cuff shoot, I feel like that is something that needs to kind of rebrand pretty regularly.
Yeah, something that remains consistent, that pulls throughout, right?
So it's recognizable.
Yeah. So, and that might be just the logo, or it could be a key color. Like, I could see where you could maintain a color and you could have lots of other things change. But certainly depending on the event and how long running it is and how many people attend, like all of those things are different variables in how much it can rebrand. But I think that's a great question. So trying to find something that pulls through as a common thread, but then knowing that you probably have to create a fresh wave of excitement every year. You probably can't just use the same poster, the same ads, the same messaging on repeat. Like, that's probably not going to work year after year.
Yeah, and again, it just depends on the equity and how recognizable that event or is. It's just like I remember, like, this isn't an event, but like I remember when Google used to change their logo, like and it's like that's kind of like from a logo designers is like you don't change the logo. Are you crazy? But
Except that
it's
it's
like
Google and we're
they're
all on it like
Google,
every day. It's
right?
ubiquitous.
And so you don't have like a small company saying like, "Hey, I'm gonna change my logo every month." Google does it. It's like you're not Google. So
Yeah.
yeah, it depends.
Yeah, exactly. And even with them, half the time they're just adding things to it, not
Yeah.
completely changing it.
Right. Right.
Okay, great. So, was there anything else, Andrew, with like mergers and acquisitions? Do you have any examples that you want to bring up? Or anything more on that topic before we move on?
Let's see. I mean, I can show you actually some brand architecture examples that we've done.
Cool.
I kind of do that one real quick here, just so people kind of have a visual. This was for Texas Scenic, and so they acquired a lot of these companies here, and so
Start with what kind of company they are.
oh yeah, so Texas Scenic. Sorry, I forget people don't know what this is. So Texas Scenic, they do installation and products basically for the theater community or performance community in a broader sense. And so everything from like smaller kind of auditoriums to very large nationwide. It's very impressive, actually, super cool. And so there's all these very kind of like niche or specific products that are under that umbrella. And so, they came to us with a lot of disparate sort of like we'll call them brands that were
Product
kind of
brands. Yeah.
yeah
There's the
product. These are
company
all
and then there's
product.
product brands.
Right, these are product brands. And so how this industry kind of works are people know the product, basically that becomes a little bit more the forefront than the parent company. And so it was very important that the actual product logos were a little bit more distinguishable and different. And so that definitely factored into how we kind of branded some of these logos. And then they acquired like this Accutune variable acoustics. They acquired that, and so it's like, well, does this need to look more like the other ones? And there was a lot of equity. This company had been there or been around for a while, so it was like, we should not change this logo. People that buy this product, they are familiar with how this looks. And so we kind of like there was a little bit of a hybrid to where we have this kind of endorsed logo where it says Texas Scenic above there. And so anyways, there's a lot of decisions involved in how that kind of comes into the fold. But there's some continuity with having the small little Texas Scenic that's endorsed there, but it doesn't take the hierarchy on these because the company or the product name really should have been or needs to be like the hero.
Distinguishable. Yeah.
Yeah. So
No,
that's kind of one example. We did this for Belden Roofing Company, and they went and had a bunch of kind of products that all catered towards a kind of a residential audience. And so insulation, gutters, siding. And so these, as you can tell here, it's almost the opposite of the Texas Scenic example, where these are all very, very similar looking, where it's Belden, 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 and it's roofs, windows, insulation. The audience here there's a lot of overlap here. And so it just really reinforces like the Belden brand in this case. And it's like, oh, well, I trust Belden Roofing, and so they must do the same quality for the windows. And so it should look very consistent because it's like I'm familiar with the quality of Belden. So it just adds that equity to the siding and the gutters. If they have never worked with them or bought from them, they feel more comfortable doing that because of the Belden brand.
Those are two great, really different examples. So you can
Yeah.
see how brand architecture comes into play when we're making some of these decisions. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so something that's not as extreme is just maybe adding a product or service, right?
Yeah.
So how might that affect your branding?
So yeah, and so not everything is like, hey, we're adding this service. Oh my goodness, we got to rebrand. It's like, well, hold on, hold on here.
Maybe,
So
maybe
like,
not.
yeah, maybe not. There's little tweaks. There's there's definitely different levels of this. So like a real common, example, of course, would be like if you're construction company or something. It's like we we've been doing commercial construction, but we want to add a residential arm now. So that is adding a product or service. But as you can imagine, a commercial brand of construction looks and sounds different than a residential. And then if you have that kind of merging, it's like, well, do they, how does that look? How does that sound? And so typically for like residential type of construction, it's a lot more approachable. It's friendly. You're dealing with end consumers. And so it needs to look, hey, I'm building a house or whatever. So there's usually a warmth and approachability to it. Not that commercial is completely opposite, but you're talking to different people.
It's an emotional decision. Yeah, like a home is a very personal, emotional thing where commercial construction, there may be a project manager that works for a company that, is just approaching it from a very like business-like standpoint where it might be all about budgets and timelines and like how you interact from a customer service level. So those needs and pain points are just really different from one audience to the next. And so we've seen this go both ways where a commercial company will start offering residential or a residential company will start offering commercial, whether it's like construction or architecture, or it could be in-home services, things like carpet cleaning could be offered to residential and also to commercial. And so sometimes that parent brand is fine, and we tweak messaging and we tweak, some of the approach. Sometimes they need, a clear division when you come in the front door of a website, to say like residential go this way and commercial go that way to get the things that are relevant to you. Certainly the whole customer experience, the way the teams interact with those different types of customers, the sales materials that they need, the follow-ups that they need, and the retention activities all vary really differently.
Very different.
Yeah. And so if we encounter a business that, approaches us saying, we're expanding in this direction, regardless of which it might be, or any other type of industry, it always goes back to audience, understanding those pain points, understanding their needs, understanding their unique customer journey, and then looking at the brand honestly and saying like, yeah, that seems like it'll work, or maybe with some tweaks, or maybe that commercial looking crane and building aren't going to be what we need to approach residential home building. So another spin on this is like, what if the audience stays exactly the same? Like, is there a situation where you have the same audience, but you add a product or service and all of a sudden need a different brand? Is there a situation where you could see that happening?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a pretty common one as well, to where a company or a brand will just, add just to kind of diversify maybe a little bit of their offerings, to where, and a common kind of example, we've seen is kind of like in the, I guess, IT space, where, the companies may start out with just kind of selling hardware and software. Then they kind of like evolve into managed services. But then all of a sudden it's like, hey, there's a lot of overlap that we're seeing customers or our competition starting to offer, like cybersecurity and things of that nature. And so your company starts to evolve and your brand needs to kind of like keep in pace with that, because, especially like something like cybersecurity, there's a very kind of like, that's a whole different sort of like look and messaging, to where, again, like you're talking about your audience and like kind of what they care about, where you're talking about hardware and software, but it just overall, you might need to, or probably need to look and sound different if you do something like that.
Yeah. And again, we've been in business for a really long time, and we've done branding for a whole ton of different IT and technology companies, and technology has changed dramatically in the past 30 years. So we've seen lots of different evolutions of IT companies adding products or service, as things have changed. And we've seen that in home improvement also. So, a lot of different industries can have that kind of product or service addition. And it really does come back to like, okay, even if it's the same audience, are we communicating the same thing? Does this product or service need to be stable, or does it need to be and safe, or does it need to be fast moving and agile? Like those have two different looks and feels, and there's two different tones that you would use in the messaging. And so really getting into the subtleties of what you're trying to communicate in a brand, I think is really important. So might be the same company, might be the same audience, but you can't just necessarily slap another product or service into the mix and have the branding still work. So it's always something to consider.
Yeah.
From the branding nerds, of course. So we think it's real important. So another thing, Andrew, that's really important, competition. So let's talk about when competition might force you to rebrand.
Absolutely. And so that is so other than, of course, target audience, you got to look at your competition, because it's real easy to just kind of like, oh, well, I know my company, this is kind of what we do, and this is how we do it and how we say it. And we've been doing that for 20 plus years, and it's been fine. But as your competition changes, and it will, things can change pretty rapidly. And so one of the things we see a lot is the companies and brands, they just start all kind of blending together, because everybody's kind of saying the same types of things, to where it really takes a competitor that comes into the market that is, kind of a disruptor, to really kind of give people like, hey, what is going on? And you start losing like market share. And so that's usually like kind of like people come to us when that happens. But yeah, it's really this sort of like just blending in with everybody, and you just become kind of like bland brand where you're just like everybody else.
Yeah, and we'll see that sometimes, a whole wave will hit an industry, like when all IT companies, again, being old, having a long perspective on this, when all IT companies were metallic looking and swooshy, like that was a thing. And we'll see in certain industries that there are trends or waves. And so it might be something visual like that. But you also mentioned messaging, and that's so important, because regardless of what your logo is, you need to tell a story through imagery and through words, and hopefully that sets you apart from the competition. And a lot of times, especially in older, more established industries that haven't had a lot of disruption or change, like everybody will just start to sound the same and look the same. And as a customer or a prospect, you may not really, from an external view, be able to figure out what makes any of them different, or why I should choose one over the other. And so we do see a lot of just kind of stale looking brands and businesses coming to us. And you mentioned market share, like, hey, things are starting to slip. And so sometimes that's just like stagnation. And then, the other time, just to reinforce, like new competitors entering the marketplace, there could be a disruptor who all of a sudden is saying different, looking different, and they really start to make it challenging to compete. And if you've been coasting for a number of years or even decades, then that is probably the biggest challenge, to reinvent yourself and to feel comfortable with that. A lot of times companies are like, oh, but we're afraid we're going to upset our older customers or our past customers or our current customers if we go through a rebrand. But that's almost never the case. It's almost always a huge opportunity in that type of case to show that you're innovative, that you're staying on top of what's going on in the industry. And I see Cristobal came back on, so I think we probably have another question, if you want to hit us with a question.
Yes, sure. So we may have slightly answered this, but someone's asking, when companies do start blending in with competitors or losing market share, how do we know if that's actually a branding issue versus a marketing execution issue?
That's a good one. It's really, when we engage with different companies, there's, we don't just kind of start going as like, all right, let's just start rebranding or let's start doing that. So we got to really kind of like diagnose kind of like, well, where are the issues here? And so that's absolutely right. Sometimes it's not a branding issue. So there's kind of like a validation phase or a discovery phase, basically what a lot of agencies will call it, where it's like, let's really understand where the challenges are. What challenges are you having? And it could be a simple fix. Like, that's not a brand. You are aligned. You're offering, you're differentiated. it definitely resonates, it aligns with your audience, et cetera, et cetera. And it might be, we don't have any sales materials or, what have you.
Or your ads aren't out. You may not be, you could have a great brand, but if you don't tell anyone about it,
Nobody knows
right?
about
So
it, yeah.
sometimes we see a lack of marketing, just a lack of understanding how and where to reach the customers, right? So you could have a great, beautiful brand that totally would be on point, but you have to get it in front of the right people.
Right.
And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's like, you could have a terrible brand and a killer sales force, and they may be out there like, it could be Salesforce or it could be killer marketing. So, if you're reaching all of the right people and they're not converting, they're not turning into customers, then that's when you start to ask like, okay, what's breaking down? Is it the brand? And again, brand with a capital B. So we're talking about it in terms of the entire customer experience, not just how your logo looks. But, on the front end, if they're really evaluating and comparing, between different competitors, how are you differentiating? How are you standing out? How are you, getting them into your marketing funnel as opposed to, them landing in your customers? I think that's a big part of it, but that's a great question because it might be the brand or it might be your marketing. Let's see. I'm looking at time. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I think I've got, one major thing that I still want to talk about, which is like, why is it important for your brand to be like unique and memorable? Like, why does it have to stand out from the competition?
Yeah. And so, branding, it's most impactful when you're in a competitive market, a saturated market. Like if you're Bob's Barbershop in a rural town and you're the only barbershop, it's going
use some scissors and some red and white stripes.
It's going to be tough to sell Bob on a rebrand when it's like, where are they going to go? So most businesses don't have that situation where it's like, hey, there is competition. And again, like as we talked about earlier, and it's coming out of the woodwork now, and especially now with technology, there's just so much more competition, a non-traditional competition sometimes too. And so good branding that really resonates with your audience is very important, obviously. And so it's really that kind of process of, and honestly, like when we're doing a rebrand, that doesn't mean like, oh, blow it all up. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times what we're doing when we're doing a rebrand, it's identifying what is it really that makes you different and unique that is going to resonate with that audience. Because again, that kind of cycle of like, you're just used to saying the same things that everybody else says, but then it just kind of goes in one ear, out the other, where it's like, let's really identify what is it that makes your company unique and memorable, and let's dial that up. You need to lead with that because everybody knows you sell this, and that like everybody else, And so it's really that kind of situation where we're really trying to understand and to be able to make it unique and memorable. It's all these things we've kind of talked about. Talk to your audience specifically. It's not this, we cater to everybody. Let's really focus in and narrow it in. And you do that with every facet of your branding, and that becomes a very unique and memorable brand, not only in addition to like the visuals.
Yeah, and I think that this is where the skill of the designer really comes into play, right? Because how do you capture some of these unique characteristics in an identity? Maybe if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so it is this collaborative process, because you can go through like a strategy of kind of like, okay, yes, we've identified that we need to look more like this, and this, because that is going to align with our audience, but there's the execution of that. And so that can go a lot of different ways. And so it's really having a deep, again, understanding it's a team really to be able to execute on that strategy of like, okay, we need to sound this way. That's not something you want to just Google. It's like you have copywriters, you've got designers, you've got, everybody involved to really like, okay, we understand the goal, we understand the strategy. this is how this is best going to resonate and make you stand apart, because again, you got to look at the big picture, you got to look at the competition, you got to look at everybody, because it's really easy to kind of get into this funnel of like, oh, this would be super cool, it checks the box of, of what you need to communicate, but it's like, guess what, that's what competition A, B, and C, they do the exact same thing. So it's really this sort of like juggling act to be able to communicate who you are as a company authentically, that's going to resonate with your audience and is different from what your competitors are doing.
Yeah, and so that's the real difference that you see when you see more education and you see more experience. And so when you're paying more for design or branding, that's what you're paying for. And that's why sometimes it's more expensive, right? So you can find some really experienced, educated, talented people on Fiverr. So I'm not saying that like you can't find incredible freelancers who have that background. I just think that the average consumer or even business owner may not know why that's so important and to ask those questions, right? Being able to use the tools and make something look cool is not the same as being able to meet all of these business requirements and to understand the strategy and to know how that translates. So I do think just really interviewing and understanding, asking for case studies and testimonials and talking to the designer about the strategy behind the brand is really important when you're hiring a designer, just to make sure that you get as much strategy packed into it as you possibly can. So excellent. Okay, so we are pretty much at time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Andrew and I could go on and on for literally hours on this topic, as we have done in the past 20 some years. So Cristobal is going to go ahead and put some links into the chat. If you guys have a minute, I would love it if you would give us some feedback on this and let us know what you think. We do not have the topic of our next episode planned, so usually I do a little promo for that, but you'll have to follow us on Eventbrite or on our website, join our mailing list. So love to get some feedback from you. And finally, we don't have permission to message you outside of Eventbrite unless you opt in. So the best way to stay in touch is to join the mailing list on our website. And that will notify you of upcoming episodes, also give you access to articles and tools that are not available through the CMO Scoop on Eventbrite. And but if you are loving this, you can follow us on Eventbrite and join in the Q&A or receive the recordings afterwards. And finally, our past episodes on a variety of different topics are all available on YouTube. It takes us about a week or so to get those recordings live. We try to edit out all the ums and the weird things that we do. So those are always put on YouTube, though. And there's also a link to my link tree in the chat so that you have one link, just because when we end this video, you're going to lose access to all of it. But if you click on my link tree, that will give you access to all of these links and different ways to connect. So thank you all so very much for joining the CMO Scoop. And if there are any additional questions that have come in, we'll let those of you go that are time strapped. And Cristobal, were there any other questions or anything that came in? We're happy to stay on a few longer and answer them if there are.
Yes, there was one that came in. Someone is looking to begin the process to rebrand their CPA firm over the next 2 years. And they just want to kind of know what's kind of the first steps, or what would Robot Creative offer to help them get started on something like that?
Yeah, I mean, so, regardless of the type of industry or vertical, it really, again, we start with understanding goals, and we do a lot of research up front. It's discovery to where, again, we don't just kind of dive into all right, let's start making it look this way and start doing that. I mean, we could do that. It's super, super easy, but you're just throwing spaghetti at a wall. And so it's really just all these things we've talked about, really understanding deeply the audience, because even though it's a CPA firm, what is it that's unique about it? Is there something you're doing differently, et cetera? So really,
you could work with high net worth individuals. Right. You could strictly focus on business. We have a CPA that we work with that specializes in service businesses and agencies. So, it can, not every CPA firm is the same. So really understanding the specific audiences where your sweet spot is important to start.
Yeah. And that's an opportunity to be like, hey, rather than just having this blanket kind of like we do, accounting, it's like we specifically understand this type of accounting, what have you. So yeah, so it's really diving in and understanding your business and what the goals are, where are you planning on expanding, et cetera. And then starting from there, just to have a good foundation to start from.
And then always the competition. Every one of our projects starts with us doing a deep dive into direct competitors as well as like peers and role models. You might not consider them competition, but there might be some fantastic role models. And we always start with a presentation that kind of walks through what we're seeing in terms of industry trends, so that it's always fun to do this too, because you can almost like date a business when you start to look at the different logos and the trends. You can see the eras a lot of times, and you can see were you founded about this time, because you can kind of place it in the mix. It's very interesting. But that's where we always start with an initial consultation. Like, if you're interested in rebranding, if you're considering using us, thank you so much. I appreciate that. You can reach out to me, or, Tangela was listed in the emails that we sent out, and we're happy to set up an initial call and just talk and find out, if we're a good fit for your needs. So would love to hear more.
So we have someone asking, what about you as the business consulting? Do we push the background to set apart other businesses, I believe?
One of the questions I would ask right off the bat is it always going to just be you? Are we talking about truly like a personal brand, or do you have ambitions to expand and add other people? Right? There was a day when I started this business where I was the sole designer, like it was just me, and I was doing brand consulting and design. And I made a strategic decision not to name the business Lara August and Associates, because I knew that I planned to expand beyond just me. So I think that's really important that I would ask any like solopreneur or consultant, like right off the bat. There are times where you could build a large practice based on one person's name and brand. It can just be harder to transfer that trust to other people. They always want to ask for the big boss if your name is the one that's on the door. So, those would just be things that I would want to understand from the get-go, is what are your expansion plans and goals? And then in terms of personal branding, you become the spokesperson, you become the brand, like representing what your core values are, and what you uniquely offer to your customers is a very similar activity to the business activity. We just know that you're probably going to be the focus of a lot of the writing, of a lot of the video, of a lot of the photography, and making sure that it's authentic, that what you're communicating and that you represent all of that well.
Yeah, and again, like the same common themes, because you have competitors, like is somebody in that space doing the exact same thing, and how are you different from them, basically? And so like if you're doing consulting for whatever it is, why, like a question we asked a lot of people, it's like, why would somebody choose your business, as opposed to your competition? And, sometimes the answers they become these sort of like blended things, like, well, I'm, customer service or whatever, that are, very common things that everybody says. And then if you're the customer, it's like, well, that's what everybody says. So it's really, again, identifying what is it that's really unique, or a differentiator, a true differentiator for you or your company.
And it might be your experience or your background, or, if it's just you, it might have something to do with your personality or how you, communicate with them. Like if it is a deeply personal thing, then showing more of your own personality and, crossing into, out of the strict professionalism. Like you might not want to look corporate in any way and polished and buttoned up. Like you might want to like let your unique characteristics show. Like if you love cats, I'm just spitballing, but you might want to put a cat on it. Like it might be your unique differentiator.
Because again, like if everybody's like, well, I'm a, CPA consultant or whatever, and everybody does that. And then all of a sudden one of them, it's like, oh, and here's my cat or my dog. It's like, all of a sudden you're different now.
Yeah.
Because it's like, even though the other ones might love dogs and cats as well. It's just like, again, it's just like what's going to resonate with your audience, and it's like and differentiate you. So it's just there's a whole slew of things that can do, but it's identifying like what is that.
Yeah. Hopefully that helps. I'm so excited that several of you stayed on through all of this. We'll take maybe one more question if there's anything else. Thank you, Tiffany, for the thumbs up. Appreciate it. Glad we gave you a chuckle. Stick a cat on it.
Yeah. That's our advice.
No, don't do that.
Don't edit.
I love it. There was like a Portlandia episode, I think, where they just said, just put a bird on it, right? Don't just put a cat on it. Cristobal, was there anything else?
Yeah, there's just one more kind of to wrap it up. Someone's asking, what's the biggest mistake that you have seen companies make when they decide to rebrand?
Love the horror stories.
Mistake. Well, I mean, kind of like those, like when we started out, some of those, pitfalls that we talked about. And so rebranding, depending on the amount that you're doing, it can be a huge financial endeavor. And so you don't want to go into this as sort of like, again, like on gut, or it's like, I don't know, I think that would be good to do a rebrand. And you go and you do all of these activities, all of the time consumption and the financial, and then it's like, it doesn't make an impact. And so that's what the goal is of when you're trying to do this. It's in most likelihood, it's not just like, I want it to look better, but it's like, it needs to make an impact, business impact. And so you can go through all of these activities and it's like, oh, this looks great, but it hasn't moved the dial. And so I would say that's probably like the biggest, like, oh no.
Yeah, don't do it just to do it. Even though we love branding so much. Yeah. And there's probably not just one answer for any given business. There's probably a lot of different ways to creative ways to address branding. And so there are lots of things you could do, but don't do it just because. We do see some small business owners that just get sick of their stuff. Like they look at it all day, every day, but many of their customers have never seen it, And so how long is the shelf life? It's like when your audience has seen it over and over and over and over and over again, to the point of it no longer resonating or, becoming bland. You want a certain amount of saturation, but you don't want to change it if you haven't saturated that audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the value of your brand, it can deteriorate over time. It's like, I kind of always equate this a little bit to like buying a house, to where it's just like, hey, I bought this house and I've had it for 30 years or whatever like that, but I've never updated it. And so all of a sudden I put it on the market and it's just like, hey, how come the house down the street, it's the exact same floor plan and it's selling for 30% more? It's like, well, over the years,
they redid the kitchen.
They've updated it. So the value of their house brand is different from the audience. And so it's kind of like, so that's sort of like a common situation there, to where it's like, okay, if you haven't updated your brand house in this scenario, and it just all of a sudden the value has shifted. It's not as valuable basically as your competition.
Yeah, that's so triggering because I'm in the middle of like a kitchen remodel. So, but it's true. You have to replace the windows eventually. You have to replace the kitchen eventually. Yeah. It just has to happen. You might need a website refreshed. You might need, some updated sales materials. It's a thing. It happens. Okay, I've got to go now, but it has been so wonderful. Thank you all for the questions. And Andrew, it's always great talking about branding. So thank you guys for joining, and hopefully we'll see you the next time on the CMO Scoop.